Sunlight. Health reminders in the bottom right here. Sauna, steam, exercise, walks, etc., etc. Empty your cup is right here. I don't think you can see it. I love people is right here. And then from now on, pain is okay, not a problem. It is just a thing in the universe. Period.
Wow. How did you come up with all those?
That's like, what is God? I don't know. They just spawned in and at different moments. Like sometimes I'll have something here and I'll erase it, throw something else in. Did I tell you how bad do you want it? How much do you love it? Did I say that? Did I mention
No.
that
No.
Right. Yeah. And then up here, this is actually worth mentioning too. This is from a friend who spent some time in Brazil. It says, what's the translation? It says, "Só se vê bem como en el coraco o esencial, é invisível aos ojos." I think it says, it's something like from the eye of the heart is true. It's invisible to the eyes, something like that. Well, that's a good reminder. But
yeah, dude. I mean, what I find so interesting about you, and even like your business brand account and stuff, it's like there's a lot of Bitcoiners out there, but you seem to be tapped into like all the spiritual and infusing that in there.
yes.
Like, you know, something that's really top of mind for me. And you just posted a tweet about Jesus yesterday. I just went and saw The Last Supper Part 3 last night. I don't know if you've heard of these movies. Dude, they're so good. Like, I have learned so much about the Gospels, Jesus, the disciples, the betrayal of Judas. I've learned about all of it. And, you know, reading that in the Bible is quite dense. But the movies, it's like I get to sit down 3 hours. I'm not even going to lie. I smoke a little joint and I sit in the back corner and I'm like, this is so fucking good and trippy and deep. And like, because you're studying like the words of Jesus. But you're also studying Bitcoin. So like, how does that intersect? Because on the surface, it's kind of opposite, it feels.
In some sense, it is opposite. Well, I'm curious first, are you just watching that in a movie theater? Like, could I go to a movie theater and watch that?
Yeah, I think that, I don't know if part 1 is still in theaters, but part 2 and 3 is, but you would probably have to look. But yeah, it's in theaters. I'd recommend to anybody. It's really good.
And would you recommend to smoke a joint too?
Yes, if you want to go deeper, because it becomes like this 3-hour meditation where you're learning, but you know, like when you read spiritual texts, you're introspecting.
Yes.
So you're doing that the whole movie.
But it's visual.
Yes.
That's
and then you maybe eat some popcorn, you know, it's have a good time too.
That sounds like a blast. How does Bitcoin and Jesus intersect? That's such a good, deep question. The Jesus rabbit hole for me is so fresh. Like, even over the past couple of days, I started reading like a week ago, The Yoga of Jesus. Have you ever read that book?
Is it by Yogananda?
Yes.
I'm reading another one by him called The Resurrection of the Christ Within You, but I think it's on a similar note.
It probably is, but it's freaking elite. Like, so tapped in, so deep. But I got into this rabbit hole, this like Christ rabbit hole, and I was thinking the other day, it's the same feeling that I had when I started down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. And the feeling is the same because it was so early, but it was like I knew how deep it went and that I was like so stupid or dumb or like lacking knowledge in that area. And I knew that like going down into it would reveal so much truth to me. And I had that same feeling literally like 3 days ago with Jesus that I had with Bitcoin 3 years ago. And then 2 days ago, or maybe yesterday, I was writing an email to somebody who's Catholic back in Jacksonville. We were exchanging our beliefs on the heels of a newsletter that I wrote. And I wrote like a 2-hour long email about my views on Jesus and and the Holy Trinity and things of that nature, what I believe to be true in the essence of Christ and God and creation and stuff. In the midst of that, I felt that the Jesus rabbit hole actually went deeper than the Bitcoin rabbit hole and the Christ rabbit hole more specifically. And that's a feeling that's the first. I've never had that feeling since that 3 years ago. It's tough because it's so fresh. Like I'm 3 years into the Bitcoin rabbit hole versus so fresh with this rabbit hole for me to compare them and like see how they kind of intertwine. I would say maybe get back to me at some point, or maybe even as we're talking, something will connect. But I think that's such a good question because even with Bitcoin itself, there's so many religious parallels of like this mysterious figure incarnating in time and space, Satoshi Nakamoto, then disappearing, like kind of dying, and then stuff sprouting from his creation, and even religious parallels to the separation of church and state 500 years ago. All sorts of divine kind of interventions that you're like, whoa, this is quite mystical.
Yeah, man, I'm excited to see you keep going down the rabbit holes and like connecting these seemingly opposite domains. That's what it feels like our generation is really supposed to be doing. It's supposed to be taking these concepts that seem on the surface that are contradictory and fusing them together. It's like, yeah, you can both study Jesus and you could study Eastern mysticism, and they're the same thing.
Yeah.
Right. That's like where we're all heading. And I mean, maybe this is what's opened up for you, but especially maybe the past few months for me of like going down the Jesus rabbit hole and like listening to different mystics and stuff. It's like, as a kid, because I grew up Christian, I just was like, oh, Jesus is God. He's he's unreachable, right?
Yeah.
But this perspective shift, and I heard it for the first time on the Aubrey Marcus podcast. He was describing like Jesus walking to the cross, like weeping and sobbing. And that was the first time it clicked for me, is like, this is a human being just like me, but who surrendered his personal will to the will of God completely. And it's like, now it's like watching those movies, reading the text. It's like not just some story. It's like, it's an ideal to strive for and live up to, and to try to live that story yourself.
Exactly. That's 100% the same. I don't know. I heard the same thing from Aubrey Marcus. I don't know. It was like a week or two ago on some podcast that he was on. I don't know which podcast it was, but he mentioned that same exact moment where he was walking with the cross, and he was like asking God, like, why do I have to do this? You know, like kind of complaining about it in a sense.
The symbolism is so deep there too. Like a little tangent, or I guess it's not a tangent, but a point that I read. I think I read it maybe yesterday in that same Yogananda book. It's like the crucifixion is, yes, it literally happened, but it's also symbolic of, are you willing to crucify your own ego for that which is of the greatest good to God, and keep surrendering into it? And I feel like the rabbit holes that we kind of go down to, because you have to reinvent yourself with each rabbit hole you go down. Like, I'm sure to go down Bitcoin, you had to reinvent yourself. Now going spiritual, you have to reinvent what does that look like? But it's trust. It's like, I know that this has a divine plan, and I don't know why, but it's the will of something greater.
Yeah, that's so spot on. And I was raised in the Christian church the same way. And I don't know, I probably said like at 8 or 9 times, because we would go to sermons and they would preach Jesus as our Lord and Savior. So I probably took Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior like 8 or 9 times, because it was like, oh, if you do this, you get eternal life in heaven, you're saved, etc., etc. It never really resonated with me. So in high school, I basically like went back to zero. And even growing up, I was constantly fighting my parents to not go to church because I didn't want to go. Sometimes they let me stay at home, sometimes they wouldn't. But in high school, we stopped really going as a family. And so I just like tore the whole thing down, went back to zero. I essentially became an atheist. But then I started exploring I started out in the stars, actually, like astronomically, like what was out there in space. I became super fascinated by that whole realm. Just like kind of building my way up from zero to what I found to be true. But now what I wrote in that email is, I don't think Jesus wasn't here to save us in the sense that we take him as our Lord and Savior, we're forgiven of sins, and then we can ascend to heaven. It's not like the analogy I used was, it's not like we're drowning in water and we reach out our hand and then he takes our hand and pulls us out. It's like we're in water and his mission was to teach us to swim like him.
Yes.
Like that's really the essence of Christ in my eyes.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, I'm thinking about the title of this podcast. It's going to be like Jesus and Bitcoin. It's going to be like a crazy, crazy title. But
Please do that.
when did the shift happen for you? Because it's the same for me. I grew up not Catholic, but Lutheran, and we didn't really go to church. I kind of really got into it like 13 to 16, not like with a direct experience of God, but just like kind of this feels good. But then we learned about evolution in biology class in high school. And then I was like, oh, this has to be right. And then I completely didn't think about anything related to God or spirituality for like 4 years until some psychedelic journeys. But for you, like, what was do you remember, was there like one opening or one shift?
In terms of Christ, or like more so God in that whole?
Yeah, I guess like broader spirituality. Like, what shifted you from, okay, I'm atheist, to like, oh, wait, there's something more here?
Yeah. I think internally there was a feeling of atheism. I don't think I ever externally expressed that, but I started going down the spiritual portal with reading The Untethered Soul, and then starting to connect that with people on Twitter, and then that started to open things up. But there was kind of this like weird moment, and it's funny because this friend called me yesterday, but there's this moment where we had a summer dinner party back home, and I took a bunch of markers and pieced them together like a little kid would, and made like a long staff, like a long sword. But then I like held it up towards the sky like this. I remember I reflected to the friend. I was like, I think I said something like God. I said something to like call God to me. And then I reflected to my friend, I think a week later, that I felt literally like God had been called to me in that sense. But it was
Wow.
so new. I was like, kind of what's going on, kind of dizzied by it. And then continued to go down the spiritual rabbit hole. And then it wasn't really until like a month and a half ago, it was right after you sent out this tweet, or right before you sent out this tweet, I was going through this whole journey into darkness and finding my way out through it, and finding really just what's true, finding kind of the eternal candle of truth, which is love in the center of it. And I opened up a book right after I did a podcast. I came inside and I had just reordered The Untethered Soul. So it was almost like going back to zero. And I went outside, picked up the book. It was in the Amazon package. I come into the kitchen and I opened the package, and it's After the Ecstasy, the Laundry. That's the book. So it wasn't The Untethered Soul, but I was fully expecting it to be The Untethered Soul. I was like, what? And I was like, oh, I remember Lee St. John recommended this to me, so I ordered it. So that's what it was. So I was like, okay, this is super weird. Opened it up to I actually want to read the passage because it was this profound and significant. But I opened it up just to a random page, and it was like, I read it, tears started forming, and then I had a profound realization. So I opened it up to page 113, and the number 13 has had some weird significance for me too. That's a separate story. It starts literally with the first words, literally, were humility in the dark night. I was like, wow. It says Christian contemplative maps describe the higher spiritual paths as a process of growing humility and purification. St. John of the Cross teaches us that after certain initial experiences of grace, there will come long, painful periods in which we lose our sense of connection with the divine, and that such dark nights are necessary stages of the sacred journey. First, according to St. John, comes the dark night of the senses, in which the things of the world lose their taste. This is a period of profound loss, when all that has given comfort in the past loses its meaning. After the most splendid illumination, we enter a dry and barren place, which had crazy parallels to me at that time, without a clear understanding of the heart's road. St. John of the Cross describes this as a time of patient purification of character from pride, greed, and wrath. In it, we deepen our realization of the sorrows in the world caused by our separation from the divine. After the dark night of the senses comes the dark night of the spirit, in which yet greater purification and surrender is required. This is a purgatory of grief and confusion, such as we see in the trials of Job. Out of this time of stripping away arises a vehement love and longing for only the divine. A great reward awaits those who honor the soul's dark nights. Saint John sings of an unutterable sweetness, the swoon of grace which flows into a soul that has deeply surrendered to this splendid darkness. In this long journey, it is humble perseverance that matters. St. John says, the love of the heart is the candle flame that carries us through the road of darkness. The dark night came to one meditation teacher after years of inner contemplation and an opening to the divine. This is directly from that teacher. After many years in both Catholic and Buddhist communities, it was on a long solitary retreat that the indescribable happened. The closest I can come is to use St. Augustine's words. I saw that God was closer to me than I was to myself. God was like a vast ocean, and everything I was used to experiencing as myself was a thin membrane, floating on the surface, insubstantial, and then gone. When the bliss and divine openness that came with this realization subsided some months later, I fell into profound heaviness and dread. It was the beginning of a period of hell. After a huge emotional outpouring, everything became stuck in a deadness, without feeling, without meaning. I had moved from the Buddhist center back to Ohio to be near my daughter, taking a meaningless cleaning job. My body developed hives and asthma. The endless inner pain and loss made me feel desperate, close to suicide or psychosis, though outside it all looked normal. Prayers and meditation had become impossible. After months of this suffering, I finally got so overwhelmed I threw myself down on the bathroom floor and cried out to God for mercy because I couldn't go on. In an instant, the whole tortured state of being drained out of me, like water out of a bathtub. For 2 hours, I sat there on the floor in bliss, joy, and peace. I saw that all the difficulty was God's work. And I remembered my trust in God and that these sorrows are part of the path. After 2 hours rest, I was able to acknowledge that I could take it, and that if it was part of God's work, I wanted it. The very moment I saw that, unbelievably, it all came back, rising up from below as if the bathtub were filling again. Everything was exactly as before, exactly as painful and terrible, but that tiny period of God's mercy made all the difference. I knew I could take it, that I wanted to live through whatever God had given me, no matter what. A huge gratitude arose for the grace and tenderness God showed to me then, like the tenderest of mothers, following just out of sight, longing to help us and catch us if we fall. It was there in the worst of my pain that I learned I had no choice but to live in God's grace.
Wow. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. I mean, it resonates and connects on so many levels. Like, it resonates on an intellectual level of like things I've read from, okay, you can look at Jesus fasting in the desert for 40 days. Like, that's exactly the same motif and story you're talking about. Or David Hawkins talks about like the final doorway, the final surrender to God. And like in that dark night of the soul, all that can be done is an absolute surrender of the personal self to the divine self. And it also resonates on an experiential level. And I want to ask, like, how did it resonate for you? Why did it click so much in the moment? But I had this moment in Hawaii after I was in Austin. So this was December in Hawaii. And I went on like a 12-day hiatus by myself in the jungle in an Airbnb. Wasn't quite fasting in the desert for 40 days, but it was basically sitting with myself and God for 12 days. And I was repeatedly pushed through, which felt like the power of the Holy Spirit, outside of my Airbnb in the middle of the night at 1 a.m, 2 a.m, when it's pitch black out, because I was scared to do it. I was lazy. I didn't want to do it, but I kept getting taps on my back, like, go, go. And when I finally surrendered and I said, okay, God, I'm just going to go. And I stood out there in the middle of the night, in the middle of the street, looking up at the stars. I felt the most ecstatic love and bliss envelop my entire body and soul like I've never felt before. Standing out there in the middle of the darkness in the night. And it was like that that lesson is in the face of fear, the ultimate surrender leads to the realization that God's love will always hold you. And that's what that experience was like. I mean, there's been more little micro experiences, but that was probably the most profound. But I mean, what about that passage resonated so much? And I mean, if you're open to sharing like the dark night, like why at that time was it so appealing to you?
So yeah, good question. So late February, I decided to venture out to Big Bend National Park out in Texas. It's like a 7-hour drive from Austin. And it was the end of the month, new moon. And the thing about Big Bend is it's one of the darkest skies in the country. So you can see all of the stars, like freaking, like unlike anywhere else. So I had been wanting to see the night sky like that for a while, and I thought this was a great opportunity. And I also had some MDMA, so I was like, okay, I'm gonna venture out here and spend a night under the stars taking MDMA. And I was actually listening. So I drove out there end of February, and I was listening to that podcast you did at Thread 4 with Aubrey and the Catholic priest, and I listened. It was so weird. I've never felt. It was like I listened to that whole podcast on the drive out there. And I had this like weird, almost like mud type of energy inside of me that was like moving in a sense, but it was extremely uncomfortable. And so that same night that I got there, I ended up doing the MDMA trip under the stars, but it felt like I was like missing something. It felt like something wasn't correct. It was like I was searching for a feeling and the feeling wasn't there. And because I didn't have that feeling, I was suffering. I was like, why isn't this like this? And then there's the come down on the other side. And I had my supplements and did the best I could to manage that. But there was like the come down of the kind of depressive lower serotonin state in the following days. But I had that same feeling of like, this doesn't feel right. Like there's some feeling that isn't resonating with me. Why does it feel this way? Kind of like disconnected with reality and my being. And so that kind of continued, and it was just like uncomfortable. And it felt like lonely and isolated and separate, all of those things. And that continued on, and I continued working through it, but also surrendering to it in a sense, talking with mystical, doing the same kind of things, meditating, looking into spirituality as I normally would, but kind of with more of a pretense to find my way through the darkness. And I recorded that podcast right there on my porch here before reading that passage, talking about my experience, my foray into darkness. I was like in the middle of it though, which is wild. But it started with ayahuasca. It started with plant medicines, really thinking that like I was fundamentally broken and that I needed to be fixed, and that these plant medicines were going to do that. And it was kind of the same feeling going into the MDMA experience under the stars, in that the MDMA experience under the stars, in that I was going out there to like tap into love and feel love and receive it and just like kind of free myself in a sense. Of course, that's not how the universe and God really works. So there's more work here to be done. So I had the realization that I actually wasn't broken first. Like I actually was not fundamentally broken. And so I never needed to be fixed. And I talked about that on the podcast. But I was still like in this state of darkness where there were still subconscious beliefs that were kind of running the show. And the first one, after reading the passage, it talked about the separation of the divine in one of the first paragraphs. And it was like, that's something right there. I've been actually separated from God, and I've been calling what really is God the universe for like years. I've just been calling it the universe, the universe, the universe. And it was because I had an association in my mind and even subconsciously that calling the universe God meant that I was religious, or that I had religious views, that I was associated with religion, and I didn't want to be associated with religion. So I just called it the universe. And so in that moment, I was like, oh my God, literally, like, now I'm connected to God. I realize that it is God. It's not the universe. The universe is God. God is the universe, but it's God, really. And so I connected myself to the divine. And then it talked about It's funny because a day or two after, you sent out a tweet and you were like, I'm not calling God the universe anymore. I'm calling it God. You said something like that. I was like, well, that just happened to me yesterday.
Wow.
But
I've definitely called it the universe since. I think,
right.
you know, I was kind of the same way. Like there was like a tiptoeing around that word because the connotations around it or the assumptions people would project onto me. If I say God, it's like, oh, this guy, he's like a Bible thumper. He's like preaching Christianity, which in some sense we're talking about Jesus, but we're not talking about Christianity. That's the key thing here in this conversation. But I think the words are pretty much interchangeable. And sometimes it can even help bridge a gap, I think, for people that, because a big thing that I've gone deeper into is like quantum physics and spirituality are the same thing. And so on one hand, you can describe everything as like energy and frequency and the laws of the universe, which can help the more science oriented, rational person grasp it. But it's the same way as saying God.
Yeah. I don't think, like, I'll still call it the universe sometimes, particularly if like offering something from my being and my learnings to like try to get somebody else to maybe see it. Because if I come to somebody that doesn't have a relationship with God and I immediately throw the word God out there, it's like resist, block,
Right.
wall. So sometimes absolutely can be helpful or more appropriate to use universe. And I think it's, potato at the end of the day.
Right.
Like he said. But as I was reading, I was reading through this guy's experience into darkness, and it talked about how he just wanted God's work. It was like, if it's God's work, I wanted it. And he knew that he would be carried and held the entire time through his grace. And that's really like the surrendering into that love that always holds us. And so it was for the first time in that period of darkness, it was the first time I felt like I had exhaled and just like kind of let out some air and started to really just like receive the divine. And from there, it continued on. But those are some of the profound realizations from that passage specifically.
Wow. Yeah, I could even sense a inner transformation in you, like just in talking, like versus the retreat 4 or 5 months ago. Like there's definitely a more embodied groundedness about you and a calmness for sure.
Yeah. And I feel the same way. It was like, and it continued on because that was early March into, I would say, it continued into early April to where I designed a solo meditation retreat for myself in my room here over 3 days.
Wow.
My plan was to meditate. It was a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, the week before I was going to the Masters with my dad. So it was like, okay, go super deep here, then experience this kind of more external bliss and beauty. So my plan was to meditate 4 hours Monday, 6 hours Tuesday, 8 hours Wednesday with a mushroom trip on Wednesday to kind of like fully embody and embrace the learnings. It ended up really just being like a deep inner work retreat with a lot of subconscious work, a lot of which was fueled by Peter Caron's teachings and his offerings through his podcast, a couple with Aubrey Marcus. But it was in going into the subconscious and kind of mapping out what was actually in there and like what I had believed subconsciously for so long that was producing my external reality. It was in digging all of that stuff out, then I could, throw it over my shoulder and then put new soil down. And even after putting the new soil down, there's still, watering of the soil, et cetera, all the stuff that's come with that. Yeah, go for it.
What did you find in the subconscious and how did you make it conscious? Because, right, like the subconscious, we don't know what's there until it somehow reveals itself. So, yeah, what did you find? And then how did you actually see it? Like, what was the process?
So much I found. The first thing, so much of it was listening to Peter Crone because he asks, most of his work is around freeing the subconscious. It's really just freedom. That's what he says his product is. But he asks questions to dig down into your story, dig down into your consciousness, and then it kind of unlocks your subconscious operating system. And so it was through his questions that I could like get into the surface, but then through asking similar questions or even the same questions to myself, then that's when I started to dig down. So the first one was that the egoic mind and really our primal brains are constantly searching for certainty because it helps us survive, right? If I want to be certain that there's a tiger in my surroundings, so I know how to protect myself, defend myself, etc. So we're constantly searching for this. But really the only certainty about life and nature is that it is uncertain constantly. So surrendering to that unknownness, that state of I don't know, and then being completely at peace with it was the first kind of like, okay, that's different. Because I think I had been searching for certainty, right? With that, even that MDMA experience of like searching for love and trying to bring it in through almost control, that it wasn't really there. It was constantly fleeting because life and certainty is constantly fleeting. It's never really certain. So that was the first kind of aha moment, was surrendering to the unknown and being okay with uncertainty and just being like, I don't know, and that's okay. The second side of it was there is a whole operating system of right, wrong, and should within my subconscious. And it creates so much tension in the body and in our consciousness and in the subconscious, because if there's a right and a wrong, then there's something I'm doing that potentially is wrong. And if there's something that's wrong, then that potentially means the withdrawal of love. And then the withdrawal of love means potentially death. So it's like, don't do anything wrong, right? If I get a bad grade on a test and my parents shame me, it's like, well, I never want to fail again. And so you have this fear of failure underlying your current of life as you go on until you dig down and realize kind of the truth behind it. So it's actually understanding that fundamentally speaking, there is nothing wrong at any time with anything. Like it's really that simple. And I would assert that 100%, I can speak for myself, 100% of my issues were that I believed something was wrong at some moment. Like, okay, this is an issue right now. Get down into it. Do I think this is wrong? Usually the answer, I would say, again, 100% is yes. And so then who would I be in the absence of believing that it's wrong?
Yeah, that's a very Peter Crone-esque question. It's so good how we can use language to dig into the subconscious.
And it's like instantly with one question, who would I be in the absence of thinking that something is wrong? It's like you just like get lifted and liberated because it's like it's cleared out. It's literally liberated. So it's also the imposing of should, and that's like a big thing for me. And I talked about this in my most recent newsletter, is that the map of consciousness is really the map of should. And that came to me from Lee St. John. So if you look at the very bottom of the map of consciousness, it's shame. And so shame is really when there's such an imposition of should onto how you act, your state, consciousness, feelings, whatever, that you're in such a state of disliking with current reality. It should be so much different than what it is that you feel shame. You go all the way to the top. Enlightenment is, right? And so should does not exist in that fully enlightened highest state. And I realized that I had been programming myself and my consciousness and my subconscious and really my reality with so many shoulds across so many different things, like basically everything. I should be talking this way. I should be eating this. I should be doing whatever. And so it's like constantly walking on eggshells in the program of right and wrong, constantly searching for right, but constantly in fear of wrong. And because it's uncertain, it's like you'll never find either. So you're really just in a constant state of fear. And so you're in this constant survival mechanism, which is also what the map of consciousness talks about. And so it's in getting to courage, neutrality, optimism, and acceptance that you really start to transcend the survival paradigm. And so, you start to get into the courage to face reality as it is, and the neutrality of like, oh, I'm okay with the I don't knownness, truth of reality, the uncertainty, and you start to accept, how you show up and express yourself and whatever. And so I started to peel back all of these layers, and yeah, there was a lot in there. And there's like, I actually have a full list of inner work downloads from that retreat, which I might be called to share. I'm gonna pull it up if you feel like that's
Yeah, while you pull it up, I'll share a funny little synchronicity.
Yeah.
Before we hopped on the podcast, I'm writing a thread right now on how to transcend each level of consciousness. So like looking back at David Hawkins' book, Transcending the Levels of Consciousness, based on the map, and looking at, okay, at each energy level, how does one rise above that current energy level? And each one has its nuances, but the main theme is always humility and surrender. Humility as I don't know personally, and surrender to a greater divine will. And that it's like a buoyancy, right? And so this is also what I want to talk about in the thread. It's like the higher levels you see on that map, enlightenment, peace, they're not to be achieved. They're to be realized through releasing what is below. And that's the essence of his book, Letting Go. So yeah, I mean, I resonate, and the timing is great too.
Yeah.
And like going back through that book and refreshing my memory has been really powerful too.
Yeah, that's super powerful. I really look forward to reading that thread. I think there's been an idea in my head for a while to like walk through the map of consciousness, basically in that, but in like a live podcast form. And I'm sure your thread will be a great tool. But walking through like each state and like what brings me, us, you down into that state, and then just as you say, like transcending it, moving step by step up the ladder. But the moving step by step, just as you say, isn't by going up, it's by dissolving. It's by removing the layers.
Yeah, you're giving me some ideas for this thread. I thought it would just be something I whip up in like a day, but this might be a slower moving, like really dense thing that becomes a resource. Is like, look at this anytime you feel like you're stuck.
Yes. I know Lee St. John had a thread where he intentionally meditated into each state on the map of consciousness, and it went pretty viral. So there's a lot of juice there for sure. But some of the inner work downloads, the first kind of significant one, there's probably like 20 on here. The first one is, I don't act like I know how life should be because life already knows what it's doing. And so that's just, I think really letting go is all about letting go of should and right and wrong into just what is really. That's like the ultimate end process. The second is, and so it's like along that same note, life is incredibly intelligent because it is God and it's working through this Christ consciousness. So I don't like have to act like I should be doing something or life should be doing something through me. It already is doing what it's exactly meant to do intelligently through me. So I can just drop the should and live as it is, which again is incredibly liberating. Another download is, I live in the truth and reality that nothing is wrong. And I just live there. This is a big one. When I get triggered, I take it as a learning opportunity because, as Peter Cronin would say, your triggers are your teachers. Mystical says the same thing. Anytime you get triggered, there's something going on subconsciously that's pulling the trigger, that's causing it. And so it's an opportunity for you to ask these questions and to have like, knowing it is one thing, knowing that your triggers are your teachers is one thing, but having the tools in the form of questions to be able to dig down into what's going on after you get triggered is another thing, because then you can actually go into it and excavate what's in there and kind of map it out and build from there. And so the tools are like those questions of like, okay, am I in the paradigm of should right now? Is there something that I believe is wrong? What is causing me, on a deeper level? Is it fear of not being enough? Is it fear of something not being okay? It's something like, I listened to this story yesterday from Peter Cronin where he worked with a baseball player, and this guy hadn't hit a home run all season, and it was late into the season, and his teammates were teasing him for it, kind of making fun of him. And so he got it into his mind that he was frightened that he wasn't ever going to hit a home run. And so before a game, this guy calls up Peter Crone on the phone just in the parking lot. They speak for 20, 25 minutes. And Peter basically gets him to the point where he's like, can you be okay never hitting a home run again for the rest of your life? And the dude was like, but he eventually was like, yeah, like I'll be okay if I never hit a home run again.
Mm-hmm.
And so he gets into that like okayness, that state of, okay, I'll be okay despite or even with XYZ. First at bat of the game, he hits a home run. It's literally like,
yes,
those are the subconscious things. And it's like the fear of not okayness, the fear of not being enough. It's really like on a deeper, like all the way down, it's a fear of death. So it's a survival state. And so when you get up to bat, you're fearing death really by not being okay. And so you're incredibly tense and you're like, and that's the last way you want to perform a sport. And so, you know, striking out, whatever, popping out, hits a home run. As soon as he liberates really what's going on, liberates the fear through truth, really. Because it's not just like mumbo jumbo, oh, it sounds good, I'm going to be okay. It's like a true state and an embodiment and an ingraining of, I actually will be okay if I never hit a home run again. There's immense freedom with that.
Yeah, and you have to look at it too. You have to look at it square in the face and accept it. Like for me, what's coming through is I got myself into some financial debt over the past few years of just a lot of traveling and a lack of, because I got so into the spiritual, like we talked about this on the retreat, which when you paid me $1,000 for a football, which that's a whole other side story. Dude, I was just thinking about that before the podcast. I don't think you maybe knew the implications of that, but it's like you were almost called by an angel to do that in some way, because there had been periods where I was within $500 of paying my rent each month. And so you just doing that act of generosity, and me, I was resisting it at first. I'm like, no. And then I'm like, okay, fine. It actually proved crucial. But the point of this story is, in about the past month, I actually looked at everything. I looked at, here's exactly what I owe. Here's exactly the things I want to pay back to people. And I totaled up the number and I wrote it down, and I noticed what feelings is that arising. And I reached a point of acceptance and neutrality with it. Like, okay, this negative number that I have to pay back is not something to be feared or avoided. It's just something that's happening in reality. Yes. Like there's just happens to be, I haven't hit a home run. It just happens to be that. I just happen to be negative in my bank. I just happen to be feeling anxiety, whatever it is, fine. Look at it, accept it. And then from there, new ideas come. And then you move towards solving the issue or the problem from neutrality. And then all these new ideas, it's like, okay, what's the worst case? Okay, worst case, I would have to become a waiter at a steakhouse and I could make like $3,000 a week. Oh, wait, that's actually not so bad. So that freedom comes from looking at what you don't want to look at.
Yes. And it's also, just as you said, it's not like, because often in your case, maybe with someone else, the feeling will pop up of, oh, this number, and then they try to do something with it, specifically as it relates to the feeling, like the feeling of like, okay, I have a negative number. They'll try to like change it or alter it in some way. No, it's like literally staring it straight in the face, accepting it, being completely neutral about it. And then from there, once you kind of dissolve the charge really behind the feeling, then that's when the stuff starts to open up.
Yeah, that was such a big thing we talked about a few months ago, is like, can you look at these situations with no charge?
Yes.
Like there's just something happening. And that's the higher levels on the map. It's like enlightenment, the state is just is. Okay, there's a negative number in the bank. It just is. Right. If there's no charge behind it, then there's no negative emotions behind it. And then you can solve the problem from neutrality.
Yes. And again, it's not like we're just saying that to say that to make ourselves feel good. It's like actually what's true. Like isness is, you know, it underlies everything at its deepest, truest root. So going from I think it's like a completely liberated state, because it's not like we can't change is into is. Like it's just like a waste of time. It really just all is. And so we can play the game completely liberated as God, as a conscious creator, to literally map the is, mold the is to whatever we should.
Tell me about that. Tell me about how you're approaching, we can use the classic words of like your career or your work, but like really just like the video game you're choosing to play. How has it shifted for you in the past few months since these deeper realizations?
Really good question. I think I'm still like mapping it out, but it's also, I love so much of what I'm doing and creating and kind of like already have been. But one of the things I learned is like, it's literally because it's just all is, it's a blank canvas. And so I get to choose what I create and contribute to that canvas. And all of it's just like reading a book and then sharing something through a newsletter, or it's hopping on a podcast or creating a podcast or just writing about Bitcoin. It's really, I think, like why I care about Bitcoin so much. And I think really this is the deepest part of the game for me is spiritual evolution at the end of the day. Like, I think that's why we're all here as humans. But why I care about Bitcoin and really all of these other things is to ultimately raise consciousness, to evolve spiritually. I think Bitcoin is it's almost paradoxical because it's money, and you think money is this like lower level of consciousness. And in some sense it absolutely is. But when you realize like the deeper, more spiritual connections, and maybe these are how these two things relate. With Bitcoin, it's actually a raising of consciousness through freedom of time so that we can tap into our hearts and into our truest spiritual forms to then evolve maximally in our time here on earth. And so Bitcoin grants us that through this monetary medium to be able to evolve to our greatest and highest degree. Like Bitcoin has granted me in the past, 2.5 years since owning it, an immense amount of time just by owning it, because it's not going down in value, it's appreciating. And so now, instead of having to work for more money constantly, the money's actually done the work for me. So then I can do my own inner work and evolve and then transcend other things such that I can even earn more Bitcoin. And then the cycle just keeps repeating itself, and it's a positive feedback loop. That's
yeah. Cool. I really want to dive deeper into Bitcoin because, before I got into even personal development or spirituality, I was actually I was the go-to Bitcoin guy on the Northwestern football team. Like I would read books about it. People would ask me stuff, but I've kind of fell out of interest. I'm still interested for sure. But I definitely don't know as much as you about it. So I have a few questions. One, why don't you think it will depreciate in value? And two, I hear you as like, it's appreciating. It gives me time to create from my heart and serve humanity. I love that. What about the person who can't afford to invest any money into Bitcoin? Like, how could it help them, or where does it tie in?
Super good questions. Super good questions. The first is why won't it depreciate? I think right now the stage that Bitcoin is in is price discovery mode. So we're in an infinite world of fiat. All right. So there's an infinite amount of fiat money that's out there and theoretically out there. And so we're finding out how much Bitcoin is worth in that infinite world of fiat. And so to me, we can get into, why Bitcoin is the ultimate monetary solution, but Bitcoin as the ultimate monetary solution will then logically, all money would then funnel into that monetary solution. So from a fiat perspective, if there's an infinite amount of fiat, there's theoretically an infinite amount of fiat that would go into Bitcoin. But I think,
and just to clarify quick for people, fiat is just like normal currency, correct?
Yeah, it's political currencies. It's governmental US dollars, Venezuelan bolivars, the euros, etc. It's currencies controlled by central banks and governments. So it's the system we mostly use today. So in that world, Bitcoin as the ultimate monetary solution, because there's a fixed finite supply and all of the characteristics. Again, we can go deeper into why I believe it is the ultimate solution. But every single ounce of money, every single penny is constantly searching for the best place that transfers value the best across space, scales, and time. That's really what money is doing. And so Bitcoin is the best transfer of value across space, scales, and time. Again, we can get deeper into that. but that's in fiat's world. It's worth infinity, right? I think the true essence and 99.9999% of Bitcoin's existence won't be in a coexistence with fiat, because eventually unsound money will move to sound money, depreciating money will move to appreciating money, and so we'll move to Bitcoin. And then how does Bitcoin continue to go up in that sense? Well, there's a fixed amount of Bitcoins, 21 million ever. And so that number is denominating all of the value, all of the goods and services in the economy. Like, that's the part of the role of money. And so if there's a fixed amount of 21 million Bitcoins and everything else is continuously going up in supply and quality, like we're producing more computers and the computers are of higher quality, well, then that value in the numerator is going up and Bitcoin is staying at 21 million. So theoretically, what's the value? What's the amount of value that can be created by intelligent species? It's theoretically infinite. Like we don't really know the boundary of it. We don't know the limit to how much value can actually be created by humans, AI, etc. 500 years from now.
So yeah, I have a little follow up on this. Like to just dig deeper into it, because I want to understand and I want to try to pick holes too.
Please.
Okay, so if there's a limited amount of Bitcoin that can ever be in circulation, 21 million, why would it not be that the wealthiest people end up accumulating all of it and then the poor people can't have any of it? And then it creates an even wider margin between the rich and the poor. Like, how do you see that? I have a theory. Actually, I'll drop it real quick. And by the way, guys, I don't know a lot about this, but my theory is, in my ideal future world, money is not even, it doesn't matter. It's just we all have the abundance we need. Everybody has a nice house. Everybody has clean food, clean water. And then the excess potential of what humanity can create and trade, that is what Bitcoin is used for. But the baseline needs are not needed to be met by money.
I agree with that. I think that's where it's going to end up, because the world will become so abundant and prosperity will...
It already is too.
Right.
But it's just the system is not set up to capitalize on it.
Really, we're not pricing in infinity properly. And that's a very, on the surface, that might seem like weird, but that's like a very significant, fundamental delusion with reality. Because I believe, again, all of the value that's able to be created, and even right now, it's hard to put a map on how much value is truly out there, is infinite. And so if you look to the laws of mathematics, if you denominate infinity, all the value in the world, by infinity, which is fiat's nature, that's an undefined output. So that just breaks the laws of math. If it's zero, it's the same thing. So you need an actually verifiably finite number to accurately denominate infinity, thus that we can price it in properly and accelerate. So to answer your question about the wealth gap, there's a lot to it. One, I think it's important to highlight how there's a wealth gap created in fiat. So 95 to 99% of the money created in fiat is issued from banks using debt. And so the people that get the most debt at the cheapest rates are the already wealthy in the system, because they're deemed to be the most credit worthy. So they can go to a bank, like if you're a public company, or even somebody who's super rich who has a bunch of real estate already, they can get a poop ton more of money at a much lower rate than somebody who's working 3 jobs that has to pay off every bill at the month. So they're able to get the new money at a much higher rate at a lower cost. And so this really just gives the already rich more money compared to the poor. And so if you look at the wealth gap, since there's a chart on the internet since 1984, you see that the bottom 50% actually had more wealth in the United States than the top 1%, but it's gone like this over time, such that the top 1% has overtaken the bottom 50% because of this indirect mechanism, or unfair, unequitable mechanism into who gets the new money. So relating this to Bitcoin, first is that people are like, well, people that bought Bitcoin earlier, they have such a greater amount of coins, and that's not really fair because they own a higher percentage of the coins. Well, I think it's important to understand there's a wealth distribution curve, but there's also a risk distribution curve. So if I decided to buy Bitcoin or even if I decided to start mining Bitcoin in 2009, there was a period of 9 months when it was literally worth nothing. So I made a decision to dedicate my computer hardware, pay electricity costs to run the miner to mine something that was worthless. That's incredibly risky. And I had no idea that it would be worth anything. So as time has gone on, it's become less risky to buy Bitcoin because it's kind of been mapped out, okay, this is more legit. It's been legitimized by the financial market to an increasing degree. But like 10 years ago, if someone bought a crap ton of Bitcoin, they took on a lot more risk than someone that buys Bitcoin today. And so it's fair that they got more Bitcoin 10 years ago. But deeper down the line, I think this is most pertinent to your question in terms of like, how does it not just all funnel to the wealthy, and how do they keep all of it versus the poor? The idea with Bitcoin is that it's all proof of work, but also money is no good. Like it does you absolutely nothing if you never spend it. And so the wealthy people will have to spend their money somehow, some way to live their life, to pay for the things that they want. And because they're wealthier, they're more abundant, they'll actually spread that abundance further. So somebody, just as it is today, again, it's all proof of work, will have to, in some shape or fashion, present a form of productivity to the market to where they receive the value for somebody else. And so if you produce value, you'll receive value. I think that's a completely equitable state. Additionally, the wealthy can't earn any new money to continue that wealth gap as a result of them owning already a higher percentage of Bitcoins, because there's no additional Bitcoins past 21 million. So the only thing they can do is save it or spend it on things that they want. And by spending it, they're actually distributing it to a wider number of people that are producing value. So it really all funnels down toward a value-based economy and value for value, because you won't be able to earn money just by going to bank and say, I want money, and they give you money. It just won't work that way. You'll earn money from producing value to the economy, from producing value to somebody that has Bitcoins, such that they say, okay, I'll give you XYZ or X amount of Bitcoin, and then you'll receive the Bitcoin. So it's just comes down to how much value you're creating and how much value the market deems that you've created.
Yeah, it's a good answer. Yeah, I'm definitely like out of my depths here, but I'm kind of just in theory land, and I'm like, how does this all work? A few things were coming through. One, it's like the wealthy ideally will have to become very conscious and ascending up the map of consciousness, to use that model, themselves. So that, if all the wealthy are operating from the frequency of love, that is naturally going to get redistributed to the entire humanity, because they see humanity not as I'm better than or worse than. It's just, that's an extension of me. That's an idealistic world. But in this world where, we're pretty ahead of the curve, we're from America, we are very curious, we've gone down rabbit holes. I mean, you, especially with Bitcoin, how many billions of people in Africa and India have never heard of Bitcoin? And then like, what value are they going to supply to the market? Now, it's such a theoretical question, but that's, yeah, I would love to hear, because everybody seems to take the side of, yeah, Bitcoin's the future. At least all the smart people that I look up to, Naval, you, like all these very smart people. I want to hear somebody poke holes in Bitcoin's argument with like very deep knowledge. And I would love to be that person, but I don't have a economic worldview that's quite there.
The chapter I'm writing in my book right now is Steel Manning Bitcoin, and it presents, I don't know, I've written like 20 something pages right now, presents arguments against Bitcoin and why it may be flawed or can't or won't work as money. And then I rebuff them. I provide a rebuttal argument. But I think to your point about what's considered the global South, and just that something popped up in my mind as I said that. I wrote a chapter called Why Bitcoin Matters, and it will be one of the chapters that I released for free prior to the book. And it gets into the IMF and the World Bank and really the fiat system that's been extended out to the global South. And there was probably like 6 or 7 times as I was writing, I had to get up from my chair and just like shake my head in disgust because of how savagely disgusting these organizations that really aren't elected by anybody, like the IMF and World Bank, are global organizations, some of the biggest organizations in the world with no electoral process. So they're just, people assigned a whole bunch of power. And it's, a whole chapter, and I'll save that. But the global South is actually seeing the highest adoption rates with Bitcoin because they have the highest need for it, because they're being oppressed the most by the fiat regime. As you said, for us, it's like we live in the most abundant country in the world. Like, life is pretty good here, even though we're in fiat, and there are still plenty of people struggling, and life can be difficult as it's getting more expensive in fiat, and it will continue to get more expensive in fiat terms. But we don't necessarily have like the strongest need to pivot to something else. Like somebody in Iran, an innocent civilian that's completely boxed out of the legacy banking system because they've been sanctioned globally by the United States and the powers at the top that say Iran cannot use our banking system. So they don't have access to the banking system. Bitcoin offers them an open protocol to where they can then tap into it, receive Bitcoin, and they don't need permission from the United States, Iran, any banker. They're able to then receive money and hold it, again, permissionlessly in an openly accessible, verifiable network. And so, again, you're seeing the highest rates of adoption in, like I was in Honduras 2024 to start for a month, and there were 70 businesses on this one island here called Roatan that had adopted Bitcoin and were accepting it as money. And you don't really, like in Austin here, I don't think there's 70 businesses in the city here that accept Bitcoin. Maybe there are, I'm not sure. There's plenty that accept Bitcoin in the States, but you're seeing the most concentrated forms of adoption in Africa, in the southeast of Asia, in the global South, because they have the greatest need for it. And I actually think the revolution, like the first country that ever adopted Bitcoin as legal tender is El Salvador, which is a country that was incredibly oppressed and beaten up for decades. And, they've done other things to kind of reform their country, but it shows you it provides some signal as to how the adoption process is going to go. And it's going to go to the countries that are most desperate for a solution, because the countries that have the most power are going to be the least willing to move to a new solution. Like the United States can print an infinite amount of money and export that money basically anywhere in the world. Why would they give that up? And it's a gradual process. But somebody like, El Salvador or Honduras that has a money printer much the same, but they can't have the benefit of exporting their money abroad. So all of that inflation is maintained within their country. So then they just get blown out of the water. And then the IMF comes in, laces them with a debt burden, and then they become slaves to debt, which I get into in that chapter. That's a whole thing.
Yeah. I mean, I'm so excited to read your book and dive so deep. I wanted to mention a little funny story. I've launched a bunch of creator cohorts, and one guy didn't have enough cash to pay me. And so this was my first experience like receiving crypto as money. He offered me half of an Ethereum and ketamine to join my cohort. I was like, this is the crazy, like, what reality are we living in right now? This is the future. I didn't accept the ketamine, by the way, but I did accept the Ethereum. But I thought that was pretty cool. That was my first taste of like actually exchanging value. But of course, I exchanged that right back for fiat, because it's like, okay, I have half an Ethereum. What am I going to do with this? I could hold it and see it as an investment, but I just traded it back.
You can't really spend it. Yeah.
No. And that's, I think the big thing is like, how can it become so easily spendable where, I go get a Red Bull from the gas station and I'm going to pay in Bitcoin, and it's in my Apple wallet. It's just as easy as pulling out my card. I think that's the big thing. And then even outsourcing work to freelancers like across the world. Like I talked to a girl yesterday. She's trying to become a freelance copywriter in the Philippines. And the rate of money is so different there. I was like, what would it take to be able to replace your salary? She's like 400, 300 US dollars a month. I'm like, yeah, like, and that could be so much more easily transferable with something that's decentralized. But you posted a tweet like a few weeks ago that I want to ask you about. And I don't remember exactly how it was worded, but you said something along the lines of Bitcoin is Christ consciousness or something like that. Can you remember, recall, and expand on that? What does it mean?
Damn, I don't remember the tweet. Man, I think that's a really deep question. I think Christ consciousness, I think it's first to identify and define what that is to me. I think Christ consciousness is so I think this gets into the Holy Trinity. I believe the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, or as the yogis may call it, the Holy Ghost, is real. Like that's present. And so the Father is God, the unmanifested absolute, beyond duality, beyond all form. The Son is Christ consciousness. It's the intelligent divinity within the Holy Ghost, or the Holy Spirit, which is this singular, again, as the yogis would call it, this Om, A-U-M vibration that's manifested from God, that's filled with this intelligent Christ consciousness. So like, to go deeper into the Holy Trinity, God has a push to manifest, has a push to create. So he says, like, that's why I think within all life forms, there's just like a hard wiring to create more life and to birth new life. And I think this is also why God made sex feel so good, to produce more of himself, of itself, to create God, and so he could manifest from the unmanifested absolute. So what happens is a vibration is created from this beyond form, beyond duality, unmanifested God. So like, a man and a woman have sex, sperm, egg, meat, vibration created from this beyond form. Like it just manifests from there. And then that vibration is filled with Christ consciousness, which is this intelligent divinity from God, the Son of God, the creation from God, that is responsible for the harmony, the love, the order of everything going on. And so Christ consciousness really is just God's divine intelligence. I'm not sure if you pulled up the tweet, but
I was trying to find it. I couldn't find it.
Yeah, I don't remember, but that's interesting. I think Bitcoin is Christ consciousness in the sense that it's an expression of God. It's an expression of his intelligence. And like, even fiat to me is an expression of God's intelligence, because Bitcoin was birthed because of fiat. So really, and even I make this analogy in my chapter, The Beauty of Bitcoin Incentives, in that Bitcoin was birthed in 2008, which at the time was the darkest moment of fiat. The global financial crisis had just happened. Banks had over leveraged the economy and blown it up, caused financial ruin for millions of people across the world. And so in the midst of this darkness was light born. And so I talk about, one, that at the darkest moment of the night, it is then right after that the sun rises. Darkness and then light, because you have this duality, this balance in the universe. And so Bitcoin is born, and I say, and God said, let there be light, in the chapter. So then I'm researching further, and I go to the actual verse in the Bible that says, and God said, let there be light, and it's Genesis 1:3. And so I talk about, Bitcoin's Genesis block, and God said, let there be light. But Bitcoin's Genesis block was on 1/3, January 3rd.
Wow.
So it was on the same day as the verse that God is quoted as saying in the Bible, and God said, "Let there be light." So that just
Wow.
gets into like one of these parallels. But I'm telling you, when I was in Lifetime as I was writing this, as I saw it, I was just like, what just happened? Like,
Yeah.
total.
I wonder if anybody else has made that connection.
I've never seen it before, like on Twitter, as far as I've seen. But it just like completely blew my mind, and I immediately had to write a tweet about it because I was like, this is divinity. And I think truth is another expression of Christ, and Bitcoin, I would posit, is perhaps the only strictly verifiably true ledger of information that we have in the world, because information can only transmit itself along the Bitcoin protocol if it's true to the code, the programming of the Bitcoin protocol. So everything within that system, within that dimension, you could call it, is true. And so again, that would be another expression of Christ consciousness. And to me, that, because I believe money is such a significant foundation of the world, it's how we connect, it's how we cooperate with each other economically. Like if we didn't have money, it would just be a barter system, and we wouldn't be able to expand and specialize in certain things. And there's a whole world of dialogue that goes with that. But to transfer the foundation of the world from one that's on fiat right now, which is rooted in deceit, right? We have to tell somebody that inflation is good. Somehow that life getting more expensive over time is a good thing for the economy. We have to manipulate people into one, getting to the money printer, right? Because there's a money printer at the top. And so that incentivizes the most greedy, ill will seeking type of people to get to the top, that are cunning. They know how to use Machiavellian tactics to get to the money printer so that they can print money at will. And so those people are the ones that make it to the top. And that's why I think we see so many of those types in power right now, because of that incentive structure. So it's manipulative, it's deceitful. There's so much lying that goes with it, along the deceitful way, but it's also violent, because the way that fiat operates is through a mechanism of violence, because it's, let's say the US dollar, for example. The US dollar is the only currency that's allowed to be used in the United States to pay debt and taxes. And so, everyone has to pay their taxes. If you don't pay your taxes, what happens? You get fined, sent to jail, penalized, whatever. And so that there's a threat of violence if you don't use the US dollar. So that's a coercive measure that manipulates the people, and it's imposed with the threat of violence. Bitcoin is an entirely non-violent dimension, because it's only based in truth, and that nobody is forced, and nobody has ever been forced to use Bitcoin. Everybody has joined and participated in Bitcoin entirely in a voluntary state and position and decision.
Wow. It's incredibly spiritual. I mean, a few things are coming through. One, you're going to love these Last Supper movies because they play out the power dynamics of truth versus power, essentially, but through the lens of spirituality. And it's like Pontius Pilate, the Roman Empire. There's the head priest of Israel. It's all these old systems that are using violence literally against the Christ.
Yes.
The truth. And another thing that was coming through is there's a parable of the mustard seed. It's like faith as small as a mustard seed can spread everywhere, right? The kingdom of heaven can start soon. Right. And you talked about Bitcoin in 2008 actually having zero value. And without any force or coercion, people naturally gravitated towards it.
That's a super deep connection.
This is a really cool link. I mean, I want to go deeper into it to really understand it, but I think you will love those movies.
Something else is popping up, because you're talking about all these parallels. And another thing that I discovered and I hadn't seen before was in writing the Why Bitcoin Matters. I close it with this, and I'm searching up right now on my phone. When was Pluto in Aquarius?
Here we go.
That was getting good.
Now people are like, where the fuck is this conversation going? It's all connected.
It is. So in the 1500s. Wow. Oh my God. Wow. Okay. So
Big insight coming through.
it was just like another connection.
Okay.
Wow. That just like,
And you feel it in your body.
yes.
The body is
It
also
got
the
flushed.
barometer of truth. Yeah.
It just got flushed. So, wow. So in the 1500s, there was this incredible late 1400s into the 1500s, and even hundreds of years prior to that, there was this incredible abuse of power and monopoly of power between church and state. So the Roman Catholic Church and the government. The church was dictating the rules of the state. The state was inputting who they wanted into the church, and vice versa. So they were really just in bed with each other, abusing power. And like one of the examples is the sale of indulgences. So somebody could pay money to the church to absolve themselves of sin. That's insane.
Yeah.
That's insane. And so even back then, what's particularly significant is that so much information funneled through this extremely tight funnel, really, between church and state, because they're the ones that produce the literary textbooks, the academia that the people followed and grew up knowing. They're the ones that produced the information that went out to the people. So they just had such a stronghold of power and information on the people. And it led to them abusing them, tithes and the sale of indulgences. And it got to a point where this guy, Martin Luther, at the start of
wow, I'm a Lutheran by confirmation, actually. So this is interesting.
So Martin Luther in the early 1500s notes and observes this abusive power. He's a German scholar, so he's kind of higher up in terms of intelligence and access to information. He notes the abuse of power and the monopoly of power going on. He writes this document called the 95 Theses that outlines all of the abuses of power, or most of the abuses of power, between church and state. He posts it to this church in Germany. And what had happened just before this time period was the invention of the printing press from Gutenberg. And so the printing press is this technology that allows information to be spread in a significantly decentralized manner, right? I don't need to go to the church and state to print information. We have our own printing press, so I can write something up, print it out, spread it to the masses. So somebody sees, these group of students see the 95 Theses posted on the church door. They go home and they start printing it because they're like, holy crap, this is wild, right? This little mustard seed, you could call it.
Mm-hmm.
And they start spreading it from there, and then other people start spreading it, and it goes all throughout Europe. And eventually what ends up happening is that the church and state are separated because people realized how they're being manipulated and abused by the church and the state. And as that happens, what happens right afterward is this massive renaissance across the board with cultural, scientific, art, academic, political, spiritual developments, everything. Did you freeze? I thought you're just like...
No, I'm locked in.
Right. Across the board, you see this massive renaissance, this boon in prosperity that happens after liberating this monopoly of power, and really just liberating the people. And so that's the separation of church and state. And so what's happening right now is a monopoly of power between money and state, and the central bank and the state. So
and money has become God.
Essentially, yeah. And it's kind of viewed that way because there's a money printer and you can just inject power and project power as you please. Like literally, but just typing numbers into a computer.
Kind of makes me sick.
It makes me sick too. I can't tell you how many head shakes I've done thinking about it. But so right now we have this monopoly of power between money and state, and along with it comes these abuses of power that we've seen, the printing of money to go fight wars all over the world. Like the defense industry isn't funded other than by the government, the money printer, right? Them who control power. So we're projecting that power of violence all over the world, creating wars, funding wars. People are getting rich off of it. So there's actually an incentive to incite and create violence, which is insane. That's just one of the abuses of power. So Satoshi Nakamoto in 2008, he comes up with his own paper called the Bitcoin White Paper. And it's this idea that is built around the abuses of the central bank and a solution to wake the people up and to move them into a new paradigm. And now what's used is the internet, right? The modern day printing press that allows us to distribute information in a significantly decentralized manner all over the world. So it starts again as this little mustard seed, this little Bitcoin white paper. And now people are increasingly waking up to Bitcoin and to the abuses of fiat. And as that awareness spreads and as more and more people realize what's really going on, they're adopting Bitcoin. And we're in the midst of separating money and state, like right now. And so I had the download to search up when was Pluto and Aquarius across history. And it just entered into it recently, right? The end of last year, I believe it was. And so that produces this massive awakening period, transformation from old, archaic institutional systems into decentralized stuff. So the Pluto and Aquarius shift also happened in 1532 through like 1545, which is exactly when that same shift of church and state happened with money and state.
Yeah, and one quick thing for people out there that are like, Pluto, Aquarius, what the fuck? How does this fit in? Pluto is the planet of, I just looked it up just to confirm, transformation, power, death, and rebirth.
Yes.
Aquarius is the sign
is what Renaissance means, rebirth.
Right. And Aquarius is the sign of decentralization, of ultimate humanitarian. And I have a lot of placements in Aquarius. Do you have any placements in Aquarius that allows you to see the world in this way? I mean, what year were you born?
2002.
Okay. We might both have Aquarius in Uranus and Neptune and Pluto. We'd have to look.
Sure. Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't have my sun, moon, and what's the third one?
Rising.
None of them are in Aquarius. But I want to see when they say church and state was separated. Because again, this Pluto and Aquarius period started in 1532. I believe Luther posted his 95 Theses in 1517, but I could be wrong on that. So that's like roughly 15 years after, which 15 years after 2009 is when Bitcoin was birthed. 15 years after is when Pluto went into Aquarius. Same thing. So when was church and state separated? Let's see.
Yeah, we're living in a very powerful time. Yes. I mean, man, I think that this conversation can definitely have a part 2. I actually have to get going. But what a time to be alive. 100%. And I'd love to look at your whole chart. I'm gonna after we stop recording, I'm gonna ask. We can look at it really quick. But I think we can end it with, what are some easy steps people can start taking to start getting into the Bitcoin wave? Like, should they get a cold wallet? Should they do Coinbase? Should they start dollar cost averaging? What would you recommend?
I would recommend studying it first, because once I bought Bitcoin in 2021, not knowing what it was, just based purely off of speculation, and that I hoped the number would go up. But I bought it and I was constantly stressed for 2 weeks, to the point where I was like, I'm just selling it, because I didn't know actually what I was buying. So I say study it, because once you get to a level of understanding, once you can answer the question, what is money? That's like the fundamental root question that I think starts anybody's true study and learning journey with Bitcoin. Once you can answer that question, then you can build up. And then once you realize what money is, you can apply the properties of really any monetary medium to that question and answer. And then you'll realize, well, Bitcoin is the best form of money because of its properties. So that's what I would recommend doing before buying anything, because you want to, I buy Bitcoin, I own Bitcoin, and I have zero stress. I don't sweat about it at all. I don't care what the market is doing. I literally don't even care. The S&P goes down, it's just another day in the life of Cole Walmsley for me. It's literally the the same story. Like I own Bitcoin, I'm chilling. So if you can get to that point before you buy it, then you're going to realize, well, I want to buy as much of it as possible. I want to provide as much value as possible to save it, or to again, buy as much of it as possible. And then you'll just start saving in it. And then as you own it, you're not going to be sweating, is the price going up? Is the price going down? You'll know the fundamentals of Bitcoin. So I would recommend buying the book, The Bitcoin Standard. That's the book for me that orange pilled me. And it gets into the question, what is money, and the fundamentals of money. My book gets into some of that stuff too. And I would love to give that answer. And I'm sure that, that's really already happened. Time's just catching up to read my book eventually. But yeah, just study Bitcoin. And then once you get to a point where you're actually comfortable with what it is, what you believe it to be as money, then you can start buying it and doing the cold wallets, all that stuff. But I think that's down the line.
Okay. Yeah, I think you're inspiring me to get back into dollar cost averaging it. I would put $250 a week just in it, not looking, and it provided me a ton of value, like that I could go back and when I needed it. But I ended up selling it all. And so now I think, okay, let's start building it back up, because I do believe in it. There's still like some things that aren't 100% clicking yet, but I think that's a deeper study for me to get into. But man, this was really one of the most fun conversations in such an interesting, surprising way. It's probably maybe the most unique conversation I've had on this podcast. So this was so fun, dude. I think people are going to like this a lot.
Yeah, I second that completely. It was so much fun. I had a feeling it would be, I had no idea. It was like, I had a feeling there was a lot of juice to squeeze here, and we would squeeze a lot of juice, but I had no idea what that juice would be. But
Same. I didn't even have anything written down. I'm like, I just know we're going to go deep into a lot of different things.
It was a great rip. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, bro. And yeah, a part 2 is definitely in store.
Love it.